The second goes through the question of the pan-Islamic attachment to the caliphate, the way that it is dissolved in Turkey, and Iqbal moves for this democratization of the caliphate, and essentially has to do with, we already again heard about it this morning, the purification of Islam from its Arabization. So, to quote the famous passage, the formation of a consolidated Muslim state for India means security and peace, resulting from an internal balance of power. For Islam, the opportunity to rid itself of the stamp that Arabian imperialism was forced to give it. So in Devji's reading, the formation of a Muslim state is actually not in tension and in relation with the Hindu majority. It's actually a process of self-purification of Islam in relation to its Arab domination, so as to create the abstract category of Islam. Now, to return momentarily to Said, to wrap up, what we're talking about is what Said raises in terms of traveling theory, and in traveling theory revisited later on, which is the way that texts, as they circulate, acquire the contradictions that, or the resolutions that they encode in different contexts, are displaced from the conditions which first brought them about. That is what he argues in traveling theory. In traveling theory revisited, it's much more interesting. It's the way that it's not that it loses that which made it meaningful in the first place, it's that it acquires new forms of signification in different contexts. Pierre Bourdieu has developed this in a tremendously fascinating way, which speaks directly to the kinds of questions we'll be putting, which is the way that when we read Iqbal, it comes with prefaces, it comes with blurbs, it comes with covers, it comes with introductions, and all of this is not forms of betrayal or not of the original text. It's the ways in which texts are put, when they are translated, come to function with new significations in new contexts that have to do with the context into which they are brought. Iqbal's self-reading is what I would mention next, and I will only mention this to end, because I can't go through all the other categories. And it's basically this, that there is a very interesting letter that he wrote to Nicholson in 1921, and it tells us basically the authorial attempt to control the meanings, because he is reviewed, and then he responds to the reviews. And I just want to pick up on a couple of points that speak directly to the kinds of issues that we were talking about in terms of culture, colonialism, and so on. And that is, and the kinds of questions that Javed raised earlier, is the attempts to, who was he speaking to? We heard earlier that Iqbal was trying to speak to, why isn't he read? Why has he been ghettoized? Well, we should raise the question of who is he interpolating, okay? Because this is important. Who was he actually addressing and interpolating in his texts? And when we have, for example, one of the very important references to the question of cultural cultural imperialism, which are where he addresses those Muslims who are now churchgoers, as he calls them, in other words, who are aping the West and modernity. He's appealing to those, and he is also appealing to the Muslims who are seekers, who are looking for regeneration. Does he address directly the West? Well, we have a way in which here he says, when you English people want to read me, the best way is not to read me, for example, through Nietzsche, but to actually read me through the kinds of debates that are taking place in your country. And he mentions one particular English thinker, Alexander, whose Gifford lectures and so on were published, and he says, read me through this. You will actually get a better understanding of what I'm trying to do by domesticating, by putting me in the domestic context of what you're doing, than by exoticizing me in relation to something that then has its own Germanic figurations in relation to England and so on. Another is where he talks about the question of the very important question of this Superman, of this regent who will come and so on. And he says, look at the kinds of things that Mackenzie is doing with Introduction to Social Philosophy, where he talks about the need for a prophet, or even for a poet prophet. That's what I'm talking about. So again, read me in terms not just of the Sufi figures and so on, which you may consider alien, but try and think in terms of categories that you can relate to and make sense to you. There's a whole series of things that he goes on in that letter, which speak to the race idea, for example, that we talked about before. And also, last point I want to make, really, well, one before last, is then he says that the object of my Persian poem is not to make out a case for Islam, the ghettoizing that we were talking about before. So the critic says, you know, this is just about Islam. And he says, the case I'm making is not about Islam. It is, my aim is simply to discover a universal social reconstruction. Now, the point I would like to remind you, however, is don't take this at face value either. Now he's writing to an English critic about English critics, and he wants to bring a particular reading. So one of the things he reminds him is, okay, you read me all through Western thinkers, and because that's what I wrote in the letter to you that you use in the preface, but in the Hindustani edition that I published, it comes with an introduction that places it in a different context that goes back to the Islamic tradition. So in other words, Iqbal also knows how to package himself to the different audiences that he's trying to read. And we mustn't forget that. Now, to go to the end or to the beginning, which is my title, I suppose I would have read the famous jihad that you may know, but it would probably get me arrested. So, thank you.